everyone. I wanted to spend a few moments talking about codependency today. May be a familiar term, may not be, but today I want to introduce what it is and also 4 types of codependency that people can oftentimes fall into. So the term codependency was introduced way back in order to center on supporting partners who are navigating alcoholism. And so since then, we've recognized that the term codependency has really evolved. And codependency can show up in relationships outside of addiction. And it can really be present in any type of relationship, including your family system, romantic partnership, or even professional relationships that we have. At the core of codependency, what you look for and notice is an imbalance in a relationship. One person tends to make significant sacrifices to take care of another person. This can lead to a loss of self-identity. It can create low self-esteem and low self-worth in a person. And oftentimes the person who is codependent will have an unhealthy reliance on the relationship in order to feel better or a sense of control for a lot of them. So we call codependency a behavioral condition in a relationship where one person enables another person's addiction, their poor mental health, their immaturity. If they're irresponsible, that can be sort of enabled, or any sort of underachievement. That's what I mean. It's pretty broad as to how we can be codependent in relationships. But needless to say, it's a relationship pattern that you can ultimately make changes to, really important to note. But it's a relationship pattern that's destructive. And it oftentimes leads to intense resentment, dissatisfaction in the relationship, and a lot of emotional distress. So the 4 primary types of codependency, they seem similar, although they have their different sort of waves to them. So is the enabler, the controller, the people pleaser, and the martyr. So each represents a different wavelength of how a person may lose their sense of self in the relationship. So we first start with the enabler. This is a type of codependence which facilitates harmful behaviors in others. So enablers oftentimes act out of a misguided sense of love or duty. We see this happen with a lot of partners or a lot of parents or a lot of children that are supporting their parents through a vulnerable time. The enabler oftentimes feels responsible for the other person's well-being, which is a very big responsibility and ownership to take on. And oftentimes that comes at the expense of their own well-being. So enablers oftentimes struggle to set boundaries. It's very difficult for them to say no and to follow through on no, and they oftentimes sacrifice their own needs to accommodate others. So this comes at a great cost to both the person who is codependent and the person who they're in relationship with. We then have the controller. The controller is a codependent type which seeks to manage and control other people's behaviors. It's oftentimes done out of fear and a deep-seated need for security. So when people feel a loss of control, we know that they make all the attempts possible to try to control everything around them. So controllers struggle with uncertainty. They feel compelled to control their environment or other people in order to feel safe. They oftentimes have a difficulty in trusting other people, and they may struggle with the ability to let go and allow others to make their own decisions. That's a really big piece of the controller. And what happens is somebody in this type of codependency state, they oftentimes struggle with a lot of anxiety. Then we have the people pleaser. This is a codependent type that's oftentimes seeking approval and validation from other people. They oftentimes go to great lengths to avoid conflict and try to maintain harmony as best as possible, even if it means they're suppressing their emotions, experiences, their needs, and desires. People pleasers, oftentimes at the core of things, they struggle with self esteem and they put a lot of emphasis on what other people think or feel about them. So oftentimes they base their self worth, which is how we internally feel about ourselves, on others' opinions, and they struggle to assert their own needs and boundaries. So the people pleasers oftentimes appear to get along well and be agreeable, but in reality, it comes at a great cost to themselves and also the relationships that they're in. Fourth category, the martyr. The martyr is a codependent type that consistently puts others' needs before their own. That can be at the core of codependency. You know, they oftentimes sacrifice their own well being for the sake of others, but the martyr will oftentimes struggle with feelings of resentment and a lack of fulfillment in their own lives and in a lot of their relationships. So, martyrs oftentimes struggle with self care. They usually neglect their own needs and desires, but they oftentimes feel a lot of guilt in prioritizing themselves. So then the resentment that they feel becomes weaponized oftentimes and used against the other person in the relationship. And this promotes a sense of like moral superiority. That's why we call it the martyr. So, if this is something that you're relating with, you know, recognizing the signs of codependency and building awareness surrounding it, step one. Healing from codependency is a journey. It requires not only self awareness, but oftentimes patience and a commitment to yourself, as opposed to the relationship that you're navigating that might be quite complicated or difficult. You know, healing from codependency involves recognizing the unhealthy patterns and how you're contributing to that, developing some specific coping strategies, and that B word, boundaries. Boundaries become the core part of healing from codependency. When we do this, we can start to cultivate healthier relationships. Our self-worth can start to improve. And so it's important to remember it's not a linear process. No aspects of recovery are. So you're bound to have setbacks or, you know, go back into your default settings of the way that you operate in relationships. That's okay. That's why a lot of people who are identifying with codependency benefit from reaching out, obtaining a professional support like therapy or a group. And also starting to talk about codependency amongst people that you have healthy relationships with. Because every now and then, having a trusted family member or a friend who understands your situation and maybe that you're trying to make changes, you know, being able to take their feedback in when they feel like you've gone back into your default settings, that can be helpful as well. So that's codependency. And I hope that was helpful. That's all for now.